I know.
Yeah.
Did everyone get a chance to sign in, I think?
Yeah.
Check you out. Awesome. Well, thank you guys for coming. My name is Deila. I work over at Wickishing in the Education Technology Department. I'm also you call me a retired high school teacher, so I'm going to stand because I don't think I can sit and teach. It's just not. I thought I could do it, and then as soon as I started to speak, I can't do it. So this presentation is designed to be a little bit of Art 101 and a little bit of PowerPoint 101 and a little bit of Tell Me What You Need. So I'm going to kind of go through and feel free on a number of levels, just go, I know this already, keep going, or hey, back up, that was brand new information, can you elaborate that? I'm happy to customize this to what you guys want to see. There's a section of it where I'm going to demo, just taking some slides that are maybe not as good, maybe not as pretty, and showing you what I would do to make them different. And then we'll talk about just kind of some general best practices for PowerPoint and some actual PowerPoint, here's where this is in the software. So this is an example of one of the slides that I think I see relatively frequently in medicine. I've been doing instructional design work and informal PowerPoint help work, I think, since I was a teenager with medical slides, just because I have a lot of family that work in medicine and a lot of graphs and text and honorable attempts at making them engaging. But things like this we'll talk about. Out of curiosity, what would you guys say is questionable about this slide?
Too busy in the color of the font.
Too busy, color of the font, very good.
Color of the background.
Color of the background.
The size of the font.
Yep.
Yeah, maybe not a good focus point.
You guys may not actually need me. Yeah, all of those things. It's I would say it falls victim to a lot of the mistakes that people make and throwing way too much on one slide. A lot of this your learner won't remember because they spend more time trying to figure out where to look than they do actually absorbing the information. Ideally, when you're doing PowerPoint slides, you're also speaking, and you want the focus of what you're saying to be on what you are saying and not necessarily on trying to read the slides. People don't learn that way. They don't remember or retain information. So the odds of somebody retaining anything off this slide are pretty low if there's also a person standing next to it talking. Now, if they're sitting at their computer just looking at it, it's a little bit different. So you want to keep in mind, what are my slides going to be used for? And we'll talk about kind of multi-purposing. If it's going to be something in a lot of cases where you want to speak to it, but then you also want your learner to take home this information, sometimes we'll do a combination of ways that include slides kind of like this, but also separates them out.
Can that be on both screens, or is that not possible?
That's a good question.
Do you care if the video is recorded?
I do not need my video recorded. Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
Here's another one where it's the same thing. It's a little bit cleaner, a little bit easier to read, called higher contrast. The color behind the text and the color of the text are far apart on the color spectrum, black and white. So it's a lot easier to read, but it's still very small. It's still a lot of information. My eye goes straight to those red arrows, but I'm not entirely sure what they are because I'd have to go through and read everything before I could really get a grip on what I'm looking at. Okay, so step one when you're working on creating presentation work is to really write down your goal. And I strongly encourage people to do pre-production, if you will, on your PowerPoint slides before you even sit down PowerPoint and answer these questions for yourself. This is the most important element of your design work. Why am I doing it and who is it for? What's my goal? So kind of in keeping with Madame Marie Kondo, ask yourself truly, will this bring my learner joy? Will my learner enjoy hearing all of this? Now, content willing, some things are just not enjoyable because they're, especially in medicine, maybe a little bit on the other side of the spectrum of emotions, but will it be engaging is another way to put that for instructional materials. Will I be engaged? Will my learner care? So the primary goal of your learning is that it will have an impact on them in some way, and it will actually impart knowledge. You don't want it to distract them. The secondary goal, and an equally important one, is are they going to retain it? And that's where we'll kind of talk a little bit about the psychology of instruction and learning. So you want to set organized goals for your learner, and that a really important part of that is letting them know what those goals are. You don't want someone to come into your presentation and have no idea what to expect. So here we are, an example, setting goals for your learner. Just like in your curriculum in a classroom, you're going to set learning objectives. And that is what you're telling the learner by the end of what I'm going to tell you, this is what you will know or learn. You want them to be defined, and you want to eliminate information that detracts from those learning objectives, and you really want to make sure that you've made those objectives engaging. So here are our learning objectives. Oh, sorry, one more slide. It's also important to be smart. Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. Time-bound you can't help. We only get a certain amount of time with our learners in front of us, and so you want to be careful not to push the boundaries of your time to the point where someone doesn't learn something. Keep it relevant, which I'm going to try to do here, but I beg your forgiveness if I don't. But I think one of the most important one is measurable. That's the one that always stands out to me that's frequently ignored. If you cannot measure, or your learner can't sit back and say, did I learn that? It's going to be very difficult for them to retain the information. So you really want to make sure that the way that you're defining what you're going to put in your presentation is measurable. So when you're writing learning objectives, you want to use words that indicate these things and not these things. If it's relative or vague, then you can't measure it. And it will be difficult to make it equally measurable across your learner population. So look for ways to present information in a way that focuses on knowledge, as in, okay, here's didactic rote things that you need to know, and also application. Anytime you can create these slides that also draw a connection to how you want the learner to apply what you're telling them, you're going to be a much more impactful instructor. And then evaluation, that's the other one to me that's really important, is what am I encouraging my audience or my learner to now think critically about what I'm saying? Even if that means challenging what I'm saying. Are they going to come back and say, wait a minute, I love the gotcha moments. It was more fun in high school because I always win them. But I love the moments where a student says back and goes, oh, no, I think I know better. Because at least you've got their minds working around what you've said. So no matter what, whether they're trying to one-up you or they're just evaluating it based on their own base knowledge, you are now engaging them in a better way than passive visual consumption. Okay, so here's our example. At the conclusion of this activity, participants will be able to learn how to talk to a patient. Difficult to measure, not as specific as we would like. So instead it becomes, at the conclusion of this activity, participants will be able to demonstrate constructive methods of communication between a doctor and a patient. So I would strongly encourage you, if you already have learning objectives down for some of the things that you are working on in your PowerPoints, kind of go through it with this lens, look at those objectives. It might help you change your slides. If you're doing slides that are more along the lines of presenting to administration or to faculty, same thing. You want something out of someone you're presenting to. You either want them to learn something or you want them to do something for you. So learning objectives, in my opinion, they roll out towards any kind of media that you're creating, especially advertising. Believe me, advertising executives are writing learning objectives because they want you to do something very specific. Here's another example. At the conclusion of this activity, participants will be able to grasp the significance of following HIPAA protocols. Well, I can't measure if someone grasps something or not. I can ask them, but we also don't always get the opportunity to evaluate our learners after they leave us. You would like to, and it would be better learning, but sometimes we teach, we share, they leave, and that's the end of it. But what you can change this to is that you would like participants to be able to identify and interpret reasons for following the protocol, which will hopefully then help them grasp the significance of following them. So sometimes it's about taking a step back from what you've written to get to the step that gets them to that step, which would be what this is an example of. So our learning objectives today, at the end of this lesson, I would like everyone to be able to define a learning objective for a lesson, to eliminate information of visual or text that might detract from a teaching point. And so we'll talk about what to pull, what to save, and how to let go of something you may previously have in your slides that you don't need. and to be able to utilize one or more of the teaching strategies that will increase engagement. That's kind of the tail end of the talk. So, learning is in the eye of the beholder, design matters. If you ever want to see something funny, Google design matters and come up with, I mean, there are some hilarious images of things where someone has completely ignored design and come up with a very, very bad mistake that they did not intend. I didn't have time to put any of that in here, taking too long, but it's a funny Google. So visual distractions, the main rule is keep it simple, as is the main rule with so many things, and sometimes it's the hardest thing to do. In film editing, we would call it the cutting room floor. If you make this beautiful piece of film, you as a director get very attached to all of your footage, and as a teacher, you also get very attached to all of your knowledge, and sometimes it's hard to let go of those things that may seem so relevant to you, but are not relevant to the story, or in this case, the student. A visual distraction can be anything that draws the attention away from the main point. In your mind, you might think, oh, well, when I apply this knowledge later on down the road, this was important to me. But you want to keep in mind where your learners are at the time of consumption. Where are they as they're watching your materials? Applying some of these basic design principles can also help you avoid visual distractions. And that's where we get to talking about art. This was something from, I'll share out this link at the end. You'll have it. It's a Vanderbilt study. And it was a quote from the students that said, irrelevant pictures decrease learning compared to PowerPoint slides with no picture. That's actually from the students. They would rather see a slide that had the text that they need than a picture that didn't make any sense. So to me, that says, don't feel like you always have to have a picture on a slide. Sometimes just a few words on the slide is all you need to drive your point home. And it might even keep it so simple that they really remember what you said. Visual distractions, like some of the other ones we talked about, tend to fall into these three categories, the ones I see the most often. Busy backgrounds, dated graphics, and poor placement. If I give you any advice, please say no to clip art. That's all I ask as you leave this room. The 90s clip art needs to go the way of the dodo. And the same thing with word art. It becomes a distraction to today's learners because it dates you and because now they're laughing instead of reading. And then poor placement is one where actually kind of, I could say it applied this. We didn't have them both on the screens, but keep in mind when you're making your slides, how are you going to present them? So if you can, whenever you can, go the extra step and ask whoever is booked the room for you, can I come take a look? Can you send me a picture? I saw this more when I was an undergraduate because we had more overhead projection. Now a lot of it's screens, so it's not as big a deal. But if you're going to be in a smaller room and stuck standing right next to the screen, you might have to adjust what you put on your slides even then because you're going to be gesturing around. Either way, placement is really important as it relates to where people sit and how they view. And too much text, just say no. All right, so these are the basic principles of design, and we're gonna kind of go through a couple of them very quickly. Balance, contrast, alignment, pattern, movement, emphasis, and proportion. The two most important ones that I think you will be able to have the easiest, quickest control over in PowerPoint are balance and contrast. Balance just is when you can look at a slide and say, what feels heaviest? What do I see? What draws my eye? What has emphasis? Where does the weight fall? It should be the most important thing. If it's not the most important thing, then it is off balance and it is a distraction to your learner. If you have consistently balanced your formatting, you also don't, sometimes if you change from slide to slide, like you jump in templates, that will jar your learner too. It doesn't feel as seamless to them. They don't feel like they've kind of entered into this little world. And if you can create a visual world for a learner, studies show that they learn more for some reason. We like consistency.
So what did you say? Use a template?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I would say, I mean, this was for me the hardest thing because as an art major though, I always wanted to build my own. It was like a integrity thing as an artist. No, I have to build my own. And I think it took me a couple of years of like, this is way too much work. And I would say everybody should use a template because that way somebody else put in the legwork. They made it consistent. They balanced it. They made it high contrast for you. All you have to do is fill it in. But the hard part about templates is there's also that tendency to deviate from the template. And I will talk about why you shouldn't do that. Or how to pick the great template, too. Contrast is another way to add emphasis. All of these different principles of design are really what help visually draw the eye to the most important things. So emphasis is kind of key across all of these. If it's low contrast, it will look really muddled and hard to read. So you can use contrast for both things, to add subtle artistry to it. If you don't want it to be, the main focus, but it makes it look nice, you go low contrast. If you want the learner to immediately focus on it, you go for high contrast because it's easier to read across the room. Emphasis and alignment. There are alignment tools. I highly suggest you use them. If things are not aligned, again, it distracts. Your eye goes to that thing that doesn't fit, which one is not like the others. But if you want it to stand out, that's unalign it, make it bigger, make it different, give it more weight. But watch for items that compete for attention too. If you find yourself working on a slide, like these two things are so both important, separate it out. Now it's 2 slides. If you cannot narrow it down to one main point on that slide, it should be 2 slides. Movement and proportion, I would say with PowerPoint, second most important thing you walk away from is just say no to movement. Don't add transitions in your slides. No swirls, no checkerboards, no spinning cubes. They're just more a distraction than a help at anything, especially when it's academic. The illusion of movement can be helpful, and we'll talk about there's some features in some of these, or ways to kind of allude to a transition through the duplication of slides that tends to be more successful and add some movement.
Can I ask, if you have, like, say, 3 points or 4 points in text, right? You don't want all of it at the same time.
That's different, yeah. If you want to time it to what you're saying, I think that's very useful and very important, and also helps keeping it simple for the learner, so only looking at what you're saying now, not trying to read ahead. But it's more like the spinning things between slides. No. The sounds, don't do sounds. Proportion is kind of fits in with alignment. It's a principle, but I don't think there's too much that you will have to deal with proportion except for that ever-present stretching of the pictures. We'll talk about how to fix that, how to not do that. That hurts every designer's heart when you do that. And then pattern, I would say same thing in PowerPoint, just say no. Don't pick the pattern backgrounds. They're so easily distracting. There's not often a use for them in academia. But most importantly, be consistent. So we'll go through some formatting, some layout. Even if you don't use a template, set these things for yourself. Make a decision at the beginning. How am I going to show emphasis? How am I going to what font size am I going to use for my headings? What font size am I going to use for my type? What font size? Even if you just make one slide that is a guide for you and keep that at the front of your PowerPoint. And sometimes that's how you can check yourself. As soon as you go, oh, but I got to make my title smaller because I can't fit it all at this font size. You might be telling yourself that your title's too long, not that there is something wrong with your font size. So it kind of checks and balances there. And then come up with your own conventions if you need to. What really works for what you're presenting? Consider your audience and the audience's eye line. In a room like this, I'm not going to be able to use very small fonts because the screens aren't that big to begin with. But if these slides were blown up the whole full size of that wall, I might have a little more wiggle room. But most importantly, be consistent across all your slides. And not just in the text size, but the placement too. At least I noticed, I don't know if you can think back to your presentations, when someone is going through their slides and all of a sudden the next slide, the title is a little bit lower, you see it jump.
Yeah.
And it kind of makes you go, what? It's obviously not a huge distraction, but people notice. So typography is the kind of the art of setting those standards. And the nice thing about a template is a lot of times those are already set. But most important, like I was saying, just pick it, stick to it. This is just a little thing that is a general formatting issue. single space after periods. Don't add too many spaces. It was a thing, I think, when I was in grammar school, even a little bit in high school, to double space after each. We don't do that anymore. Don't do that. It adds awkward spacing. If you were to have a slide with text, God forbid, too much text, even then, all those spaces kind of make you go, where am I supposed to, how do I read this? So this is just an example of, I would say, a slide that's more of a marketing slide, but a great example of something that looks really good on my screen and not as good on those screens. Another reason to stay away from gray text and focus more on higher contrast. So using the left alignment is also another kind of rule of thumb. Sometimes people play with the right, the center justification. There really is not a lot of cause to do that, and your slides will look better if you consistently just use the right alignment.
Left alignment.
Yeah, left alignment. Right alignment should not be used. At least not for this audience. This is an example of that slide just closer up. So the default text sizes. You'll notice when you're inside any Microsoft application that if you have to do something other than these sizes, you have to go manually type it in. There's a reason for that. It's because these sizes are just more visually appealing, and that's why they went with it. I would say trust them on that. Don't go with a size 13 font just because you want to go with a size 13 font. The proportions are built in. Feel safe in using those things.
Do you have any strong feeling about, I guess it's called serif versus non-serif? I guess some are built in one way and some are built in the other, but do you think visually one is more clear?
Yes and no. I think a small serif on something like Times New Roman or is fine. Anything overly serify is distracting in a large body of text. I personally, for my aesthetic, I like sans serif fonts. I think they're clean. They're the way that we write. But I also like using them for contrast. So if you go for a serif header, use a sans serif body font, and vice versa. And it adds a little bit of visual distinction between the body and the header.
Interesting.
Line length, this is just a general rule of thumb, but it kind of goes out the window with academics sometimes. Let's jump ahead. White space. Don't be afraid of the white space. That's another, at least for high school students, it was like a compulsion to fill things in. Like, oh, I need to put something on every part of my slide. And I would say white space can be a very powerful tool. White space, leaving a little bit of breathing room on your slides is helpful. Don't be afraid of it. There's not a ton of white space here, but it's balanced. You can see there's specifically the bars. There's a little bit of breathing room. It helps you differentiate bar from bar. Small example. This is just a summary slide. So this is what I was talking about. When you're creating slides for a classroom or for something that someone's going to walk away with later, like part of it, they want the slides so they can remember what you said. I build in summary slides. So this covers what I went through the other slides, so that when someone wants to go back, they don't have to go through click, 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 click to get all the information. Am I going to present with this slide? No, I'm not going to go back over it. But I'll let you guys know it's here, summarized on one place, and then you can see it. And that can kind of help you feel better about separating your slides out too, so that you know that the learner has the opportunity to see a condensed version. Summary slides are a great way to build out presentations for academia. So along with the principles of art, there are also elements of art, and these elements run through any kind of design work that you do. These are the two most important ones, I think, for PowerPoint: space and color. They fall in with the other principles that we talked about. You'll be able to see these. I have links to them. It's a friend of mine that makes these posters. I'm not going to spend too much time, but I do have a little video that I wanted to watch that is an explanation of these elements that I think is very succinct. I'm not plugged into audio.
The element of space is a bit tricky. When artists and designers talk about space, they might actually be talking about
Sorry, I lost my cursor.
Three distinctly different things. There's 3D space, positive and negative space, and white space. 3D space refers to the spatial reality of width, height, and depth, or XYZ. To render a sense of 3D space on a flat 2D plane, artists make use of 1 or 2 point perspectives, where vanishing points create the illusion of Z-depth. But even without vanishing points, whenever objects are layered in front or behind each other, some sense of 3D depth in space is implied. Okay, deep thought. It's not possible to draw one thing on a page. You see, anything you draw is both adding a new shape onto the page and subtracting from the original white shape of the page itself. So you're really creating two shapes, one that's added and one that's being subtracted. Artists and designers have long made use of positive and negative space to provide a sense of cleverness. Next, there is white space, or the spacing between objects. Such spacing of objects is a huge part of what we call composition. A lot of space can add to the visual weight of an object. A little space can make objects feel crowded. Consistent spacing feels orderly, logical, and can provide a sense of calm. Random spacing can feel chaotic or playful. And so it is that space, the stuff you don't actually draw at all, can be a key element of art.
One of the reasons I like to show that video is because even though he used design tools like the Adobe Suite to create that, you can do kind of similar types of movement by essentially applying a keyframing principle in PowerPoint. And is anyone familiar with animation? Basic animation. Old school animation was, let me bring the slides back up. Done on paper, right? You draw each cell and then you go through there. I mean, we all have like the bird on the thing in the cage, you go like this, and that's rudimentary basic animation. And in digital space, we call it keyframing because you're going to create a frame by frame. The average animation has about 24 frames for 1 second. So I'm not suggesting you go make 24 slides per second of what you're doing, but you can create that illusion by separating some of these things out so they move across the page to help you time what you put up on the screen. You can also go through and add, like you said, the transitions that you do for the text. And you have a lot of options in PowerPoint where you can bring things in by line, by paragraph, bit by word. But you could do that also in building it out through multiple slides. And in some cases, you get more control that way. So we'll throw examples of that in there as well as we go through. The elements of color is one more little video. Stop my share. And this is the most fun thing to do to me, is to play with PowerPoint colors.
Share went through.
No, I haven't done it yet. I had to open the video first.
The element of color. More than any other element, color can have an immediate and powerful impact on us. But color is also the most complex and challenging element to work with. So to make color easier to understand, the traditional red, yellow, blue, or RYB color wheel provides the foundation for what is commonly called color theory. In RYB, red, yellow, and blue are considered primary colors because these three colors can be mixed to create all other colors, but cannot be mixed themselves. The secondary colors are orange, green, and purple. Secondary colors are made by mixing two neighboring primary colors. So for example, blue and red make purple. Tertiary colors are the remaining colors in between primary and secondary colors. For example, this is blue-green. One way that colors are categorized is by way of their perceived temperature. Warm colors are the colors on the red-orange side of the color wheel. These colors are thought to be more aggressive, making warm colors often a great choice for signage and logos. Cool colors are on the blue side of the color wheel. These colors have a receding quality to explain because Earth's atmosphere is blue. As objects get farther away, they get increasingly tinted blue. Harmonies are color combinations that go well together. The big three are analogous colors, which are any three contiguous colors. Complementary colors, which are two colors that are opposite each other. And triadic colors, which are any three colors that are evenly split into thirds. Three common color modifications are tinting, which is adding white to a color, toning, which is adding gray to a color, and shading, which is adding black to a color. Lastly, the RYB color wheel is just the starting point for understanding the world of color. So be sure to check out part 2 of the element of color.
I'm not going to do part 2 if you really wanted to do it. I'll include the link in the take-home slides. But what I would suggest if you do, if you are designing your own color for your slides, is look at 2 things. One, what tone are you trying to set? What are you teaching? What are you presenting? Are you trying to get somebody to increase your budget? You might want to go with the more fun, aggressive reds and oranges and yellow colors. Are you trying to get your residents to chill out and, you know, learn some mindfulness training? Maybe you go with some blues and some greens. What colors you choose really do set the tone visually for what you're saying, and you want it to match the tone of your speech or your content of what you're talking about. So let that be the first guide. Second thing is go through and look at the color choices and templates that you might like that are in there, the stock templates, and see what it is that you gravitate towards, and that will help you define your own style. So if you like certain things, and say, oh, now I notice these are all tertiary color compositions, and now you can go with that and create new ones. But some of these color theories are hard and fast and true, and just like with all things, following them first before breaking them might help you in your choices.
When I bring that, could I ask a quick question about, I don't know about the rest of the people here, but some of us have like design templates that are predetermined by the section. So for example, I can use black with a white font or something like the standard tree and stuff like that on it. So you don't really have that much place to play around with templates. And I guess for the graphs and stuff, you can add colors that you want to. But again, if you're using radiographs or imaging or picture of that, that's just pretty much it's there. It's whatever's there, yeah. Right? And so it does make it a very boring set of templates. So do you have any suggestions around that? I mean, because I think adding borders or something just makes it even more distracting.
Well, especially because I know Stanford is very specific about what you can and cannot present with and what you use, then you're going to lean towards all the other elements of design. Your spacing, your text sizing, your the images that you do bring in when you bring in images. The only other way I could say is sometimes a full screen image is also equally powerful, and then you're overriding the template. So be selectful of what images you pick and make sure and we'll talk about that in just a second, pick ones that actually look good when made that size. But our Stanford templates are a little bit boring, but they're clean, even that. Okay, so let's look at this in action. Here is an example. This was hard for me. I made this slide. I broke as many rules as I could possibly do, and it was kind of humorous. As I was doing it, I kept like self-correcting. And every time I change, I had to go back and go, no, let it be ugly. So I've broken, I think, almost every rule I could in here, and what those are first, there's 2 fonts you should never use. They are Zapfino and Comic Sans. Never use those fonts. There's never a reason to use them, ever, 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 ever.
Why? What's the first one?
Oh, sorry, not Zapfino. Papyrus. Sorry, Papyrus. Papyrus and Comic Sans. Papyrus because it's been formed. It's been used into the ground you are immediately being judged by anybody in that's coming in from, I would say, undergraduate to above your immediate or to below for using that font.
Which is Typography?
It's the one that looks like
It's the header.
it's the header.
Oh,
And then Comic Sans is just it's a joke within the design world. Never use Comic Sans. It's an example of a rounded. It's a sans serif font with a rounded edge. I don't know how it got such a bad name. It's really not that ugly.
well, I mean, are you speaking like in a professional sense not to use it? Because I just used it for a flyer for a birthday cake,
Oh well, I mean,
you know,
for
it seems fun.
yes, but
I mean, I wouldn't use it.
I wouldn't use it in presentation materials. And you know, some people do it to be funny. Like they'll
Yeah.
use it because people will identify it, and then it's like, ah ha ha, you used Comic Sans. But in case you did not know, yes, you are
Okay.
being judged by your viewers when you use Comic Sans. It's to the point where it's made it onto buttons of things. Like I've got a button that says I've got 99 fonts and Comic Sans ain't one. I wish I knew the
Is it up
history.
here so we can see?
It's the font that the main text is in.
I see.
Rounded fonts in general actually are just more childlike and fun. So I don't use them typically in academic materials. They look more like marker or crayon. But it is legible, I'll give it that. You can read the words.
Is it built into any of the templates?
Comic Sans, no, you will never find Comic Sans in the template.
But it's built into all of your software.
Yeah, it's in the software. It's a default font. These are stretched. So we'll go through, the first change I made was, we'll go back actually, and then you got that background is kind of overly saturated. So we desaturate the background a little bit, that helps. We take out any of the graphics from the header because you've got too many graphics that were going on there. They're all competing for your eye. You get the background, you get the graphic in the header, the graphics that are added, and in the bottom part. Change the font, made it something more standard for both of them. Now these are both sans serif fonts, which is fine, but if you were to add a serif to either one, I would say pick just one. And then this would be what I ended up with, which was, okay, remove those pictures. These graphs, I can talk to these points. Seeing the graphs up here actually are not going to be very useful unless I'm going to leave them up for long enough for someone to read. And if they were truly important, I would put each of these graphs on its own slide. But this was an example of someone just searching their key points in Google and pulling out what they got. Whereas in reality, what's important is a picture here that really speaks to the title. This slide is about patient-centered care. Then I pulled out the important information from these sentences. So rather than having to read a full sentence, which takes longer, I pulled out some bullet points. Here is what the Picker Institute and Harvard Medical have created their principles of patient-centered care. I've included an asterisk up here, which ties down to my reference, and I will speak to the rest of it and put it in my slide notes. Slide notes is something else I wanted to bring up. If you don't use them, I don't use them as notes for myself. I use them as notes for my students. So if there are things that I really wanted to put on the slide, but I just know it's going to muddy up my slides and make them too thick, then down here you've got this option. I'll come back to that, to put notes in. And then what I'll do is I'll provide my students both with the PowerPoint and the handouts. Has anyone here ever not used handouts or not know how to use them? So
Not used them.
you've
Okay.
used them. Okay. It's in your print settings. So when you go to print in PowerPoint,
I think it's the page setup
The layout.
and layouts. It's a different menu item.
yeah, this is different than my other computer.
So half it down. Never mind. It's in,
There you go. It's that one. No?
under print settings.
No, it's
you
under
can
print
do it.
settings, but it's
So under print settings, you have layout, which is halfway through the.
there we go. Thank you. Okay, so you can include your notes. You can either do it per slide, or you can do the handouts. That does like each slide on one page. But the notes are the ones I tend to use, and I would make little books for my they were kids. I called kids because they were high school kids. And okay, So now let's go. This is another one that I made. The major things I would fix on here are one, the amount of text. So instead I would pull, we'll do it together real fast. I'll go up here, make a new slide. Or right click on here and duplicate the slide. Because I'm gonna create a set of slides, I'm gonna separate the information out. So typically that's what I'll do. If I find a slide of mine that's got too much stuff on it, duplicate it, and then build out from that. And sometimes that's actually a good workflow too. Put it all in on all your slides, get everything on that you know needs to be covered in your presentation, and then start pulling it apart. So I could, when I adjust this slide, the content is still here on the previous one. But in this case, I would have taken these out and put them down here in my notes so that the most important part were just the main places that you would go to watch sunsets in Maui. I just booked my trip, so this was on my mind. Not that with 3 small children I'll be watching any sunsets or sunrises.
Maybe sunrises.
Sunrise, actually, I do see sunrise every morning because kids, they don't actually do time differences. They still get up at the same time. So we get a lot of very early morning walks in when we are there. All right, now columns are over here. Separate the columns out. And then of course, I've got a spacing issue. There's some hard returns here. When you're doing spacing between your lines, I would recommend also, if you have not played with these tools, to do it with the tools up here for line spacing. If you want more than this, you go to line spacing options. Sometimes it's easy just to go in and add a bunch of hard returns, and that makes it really hard for you to format later. And it runs the risk of user error as far as breaking your own consistency rules.
Can you show us what a change would look like?
Yeah, so we'll go in and I'll say I want there to be 18-point spacing between each of these lines, and now it separated them out without needing to add bullets. So when you add bullets, a lot of that stuff is built in and you can adjust it as well. So if I turn this into a bulleted font and I go over here and go to bullets and number, I can select different bullets and customize the pictures. The line spacing actually used to be in here. I think it's still changed. I'm going up to line spacing, and you can do double spacing, have it space multiple lines. Also got some options for whether or not you want it to be at the top. Have you ever gone into a font and noticed that sometimes it feels like it's off center within the box? That's here. Under alignment, text alignment, is it the top, the center, the baseline, or the bottom of your text box? So if I go to the bottom, that brought everything up. There's another one that I found, they've moved it over here when you go to text options and go into this little box right here where you have the option to auto refit. This drove me nuts the other day because I could not find it, and it's a newer feature. I kept trying to go reshape. I kept trying to extend my text box and it kept bouncing back and it was driving me up a wall. And then I finally realized, oh, just don't auto fit. If you ever go use a template and you find it behaving strangely, that's probably why. So now I want to change my font color, another important one, to something higher contrast.
Do you know where that format shape stuff would be on a PC?
The other place to find it, so when in doubt, right click, go to format, shape, and it should bring it up. Okay. The beauty of all of even Microsoft tools is that there's always 12 ways to do something. They put it in so many different places. It's actually what makes teaching hard and testing hard when you're testing someone on software knowledge, is because there's so many different ways to do it. Sometimes you lead someone to believe they're doing it wrong when really they just found their own workflow. But I would say also, if you have not found this little search bar up here, never hesitate to search what you're looking for up here. If you know what you're looking for, that's the other part of this. You're like, I know what I want to do, but I don't know what the software's going to call it. Forgive me if this is overly simple, but also type it into Google exactly as you would say it out loud. I can't tell you how often I would say, how did you figure that out? Like, I literally typed my exact question into Google, and lo and behold, 246 other people have asked this question, and this guy over here in Rhode Island responded, thank you, George. Now I have my answer. Never hesitate to type the whole thing in. Don't condense it, just write, I need to know how to fix the spacing between my text in PowerPoint 2007 or whatever it is. Someone will have it very specifically outlined for you, usually with screenshots.
I have a question about the spacing.
Yeah.
So I found like if you go in and add the spacing like between the lines, it'll like edit that uniform spacing. But if I have like a bullet point or something that's like multiple lines, I don't necessarily want there to be space between each line of text. Like I want it so that each bullet is like line by line, but then in between bullets there's like space. So like what I usually have to do is like go in and add like an extra like enter in between the spots. But then I don't necessarily always want it to be the same size as the text. I go in to each of little space and change it to like size 12 font, whereas like the main text is like 18 or whatever, because I don't want huge spaces. Is there an easier way
Yes.
to do that?
And then if you go and try and change it later, it's a real pain in the rear. All right, so let me just start from scratch over here. And we'll create a text box. And I'm gonna go ahead and find some text. All right, here we go. Different parts of it. Bullets. Okay, so select all of this, or select the text box, line spacing. Just trying to create the exact double spacing. Oh, I don't want to return. Sorry. Trying to make sure I can create the. So you're talking about like this. So now I've got this obnoxious spacing right here.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go back up to my spacing options, make it a single space. Oh, it's different actually in Windows. Do spacing before, take out indentation. And now it will, sorry, that messed it all up. If you do the spacing before versus the double spacing, like before or after, it should accomplish what you're trying to, there we go. So you don't want to do like general line spacing for the whole paragraph. You want to add the spacing either before or after, it doesn't matter which one, and then it will continue just after each hard return. It'll add that spacing in.
Oh.
Sensitive to time, we're gonna go through teaching strategies really quick, and then I'll do some more demoing with the software, because I want to give you guys a chance to ask more questions like that if you have any other ones. So the teaching strategies thing is, this to me applies whether you're teaching kindergarten or you're teaching grad school. Are you creating opportunities for your learners to apply what you're saying to something they already know, which is then in turn critical thinking? That means you are being a successful instructor. This model is used when we're talking about creating visuals for education. Has anyone seen this before? Bad ladies? Okay, I think you got one person. Cool. This is the way your brain works when processing visual information. You've got the phonological loop, which is what you're hearing, tied into what you're seeing. You've got the sketch pad, which is kind of this intermediate between what you're hearing and what you're going to remember. And then you've got this episodic buffer that processes the things you hear short term versus long term. Your brain processes short term and long term very differently. And you want to maximize what people are hearing in the short term to filter right into their long term memory, especially if you're teaching. By knowing your audience, this is specifically talking about what the students reported back from that study I brought up earlier, the Vanderbilt study. So I would say anytime you can survey your class or your learners before you speak to them, which I wish we had done for this one, but if we didn't in the future, I would like to do that. You will learn a lot about what it is they either intend to hear, hope to hear, or don't want to hear. And this is what the audience, as far as general, when asked about general learning with visuals, what the students said in this study, that they don't like it when professors have too much on a slide, use clip art, have transitions, or have too many colors, because it's distracting. But what they do like is when the graph that's put up there specifically applies to what you're saying. I've been to so many lectures where someone puts up a graph and says, and this is really interesting, this ties back to what I said in the last slide, and then they click forward. You just taken me out, confused me, I don't understand what you're talking about. But if you're gonna use a graph, let it be something you speak to and leave up long enough to absorb. They like bullet lists. It helps them organize their ideas, but they like shorter bullet lists. That's the thing, is put your keyword up there in a bullet, not the full sentence. PowerPoints help structure a lecture. Most often they keep you on point, which is what they want you to do. They don't want you to ramble too much. And then verbal explanations of pictures help way more than written clarifications. I had a teacher in undergraduate who would hand out everything, her full lecture, slide notes, all of it, and say, put down your computers, close your notebooks, and don't write anything down, just listen and talk. And to this day, I remember almost everything I learned from my antiquities teacher. I was kind of sad it was antiquities because it didn't end up being applicable to most of my career, but I can tell you almost every lecture she ever gave to us, I remember them very clearly, and I think most of my classmates do too. But when it came time to study for the test, I had the specifics, which was really nice. The whole reason you take those notes is because you want to reference later. If you give them the reference, you kind of free them from feeling like they have to write everything down. Robert McKee's quote on storytelling is the most powerful way to put ideas into the world today. I would even take today off. It has been, it always will be. If you tell a story, if you create an online device, if you make it relatable, your learner will remember it. So if you look at what you're speaking, whether it's, again, trying to get someone to increase your budget, trying to get them to learn something bedside manner, or just presenting data on a trial or study, if you build a story into it, it will be more memorable. So look for the story. Sometimes that takes more work than creating slides. What story, what can I bring into my lecture that will help? And the story has these three important things: a beginning, a middle, and an end. If your lecture does not have a clear beginning, middle, and an end, it's time to reorganize. It applies to what you're saying in the sense that in a book or in a story, in a movie, we start with once upon a time. But for academics, to me, you start with the why. I'm going to start off by telling you why what I'm about to say is important and why you should care. That's what you're doing in the beginning of a story, making your audience care. If they don't care, they tune you out within about 3 minutes. The middle is the squishy part, but it's the journey. So when you write a story for film, it's all about cause and effect, action, reaction. The same applies to an academic presentation. Make your point, and then talk about how it's going to affect the next point. And then you make your next point. How does that relate to the one that came right before it? If you make those connections, you're building a story in your learner's mind. And the end, really important thing that often gets forgotten from your slides, don't end this verbally, put this on your screen. What's your call to action? What are the students supposed to do? What is your audience supposed to do with this information once they're done? Essential question. This is kind of a summary slide that's really in there more for you to have when you leave. But to set up for success, the other thing is give the PowerPoint slides before the class. They were available here. That's a policy, actually. which is nice. But I would highly recommend, don't be fearful that your students are going to do that and not listen to the lecture. If that is the fear, then I think you need to find another way to motivate them to come in, personally. Because if you give it, I always tell my kids, go through my slides before class. Keep me honest, but most importantly, come in with some base knowledge, because what I'm going to say is going to elaborate on everything. There's no way they were going to look at those slides and immediately just pass the test. Although some try. And in high school, it's easier because they have to be there. But I highly recommend making it so that you structure your PowerPoints also in a way that facilitates that you feel comfortable giving them out, because you know what's going to happen live is going to be equally important. I'm going to skip that one for now. So these were our learning objectives. Always review the learning objectives at the end of the class when you can. The resources, I only put these up here so you see that they're here. So if you didn't download the slides, please do go download them. These are some things that I want to go over with you now, which are resources. The most important thing, and probably what you wish I spent the entire hour on. How do I get all of these things without having to do them myself? I'm going to share. Yeah, no worries.
Are these slides going to be available? I'm assuming they'll be available.
Yeah, they're on there now.
They're already in.
And there'll be an email that goes out after with some follow-up information too.
Thank you very much.
Okay, here's Maui. The resources section are where you can find some templates. Now, PowerPoint has templates in there, but I wanted to draw your attention to a couple of websites. These are paid and free. Bless you. It's worth it to sometimes get a paid one because you're going to get so much from it. So a site like Creative Market, if you go in here and just search PowerPoint in templates, you'll find a lot of these already built out templates that you can purchase. And let me, sorry, I need to just share my whole screen. There we go. Bring up one of the ones I have already purchased that I was using for examples. So you can see you get all of these slides in here that you then just go in and edit. And it's usually a combination of informational graphics, placeholders. This is a really specific one that I think I downloaded when I was doing a marketing presentation. Another example. How many of you actually are always bound to the Stanford template? Anyone not know where the Stanford template is? Ah. Okay, an important resource if you have not been to this website, and it's on there, is the Brand Identity Guide at Stanford Medicine. Very helpful. You've got logos that you can download, which help the colors. Now, if you ever order things also, if I don't know if anyone's part of your job here is also to order banners or something where you might be giving these specifications to their company. These are what they need for graphic design. What are your web colors? What are your PMS colors? You've got your department signatures, typography. These are the Stanford approved fonts, and you can download them over here. When you download a font, if you're on a Mac, in most cases actually, I think you can just open one of the fonts and click install font, and it'll run through. With older machines, you just drag them into your fonts folder. If you don't know how to find the fonts folder, again, Google it for what kind of machine you have, but you can also search your computer for fonts and then tell it folders, and it'll bring it up. You just drag them in there, and it will become available in your software. In some cases, you do need to exit out of the software and then go back in after you've added a font in order for it to show up in your library. And then the downloads has a whole bunch of other stuff, including some video bumpers. Now, why don't I see the PowerPoint up here anymore?
Because you get to it through PowerPoint. Can you show the logo generator though? Because I find that pretty useful.
Oh, how fun. I'll have a second one. I guess it would be. Maybe.
So you could put your organization, your department name, and your unit name in here, and it'll generate a signature package that has all these downloadable things for you.
Okay.
If you ever have to make graphics or anything, I recommend like keeping them, in folders that you can find pretty easily, so that way you don't have to, go and like copy and paste the graphics from the website or anything like that. You just have your own package that.
It's a very good segue to talk about graphics in general. I did want to talk about that very quickly. And that is when it comes to finding things on the internet. So I'm looking for, what am I looking for? Lungs. I'm doing a lecture on lungs. You go into images when you're in Google, and it's so tempting to just right-click, copy, or save the image. Two things that you should always be, three things you should be considerate of. One, copyright. If you're presenting anything being recorded, you are bound by the laws of copyright. Even if it's for education, doesn't matter. If it's being recorded and put out on the internet, or I should say, once it's being put on the internet, not just recorded, then you're bound by copyright. If it was not being recorded or posted on the internet or a learning management system in any way, this was just living here, only here, you can do whatever you want there, and you're not going to do anything wrong. But when you're presenting at a lecture hall or going to a conference, and they're going to post each of these sessions online, technically you are responsible for copyright. So you can, under your tools, you could go under usage rights and say, okay, I want only show me things that are labeled for non-commercial reuse or for reuse. And then it will narrow it down. All of this is what we call Creative Commons free stuff. You can use this and you're completely doing it legally. The other thing that you want to do when you're presenting something on a large screen or you're going to blow it up is you want to pick the largest possible image because it's going to be the higher quality image. When you hover over these images, you get these dimensions, 801 by 1024. Those are the pixel dimensions. It's not very large. And so if I go to this, and when you see these checkered background, that means it's a transparent background. If I do copy this image and go to PowerPoint, paste it. Let me change the background just so we can see. So it's a transparent background. That's always nice. PNG files are the ones that are going to have transparent backgrounds most often. So if you're ever like, I just need something that's not going to have the ugly white masking on it, look for a PNG. This one came out pretty good. Now when I want to change it, the corner square is the one that you want to use. Anytime you use one of the middle ones, that's going to upset the proportions. But if you either hold shift or go from the corner, or both, and depending on the software, it's going to keep it in proportion. I've got to find a worse one, actually. No, these are all too good.
Find something that's like 200 by 200.
Yeah. Well, let's just look for.
I had a question about those images. The ones that have owners. How would the owner not know that they're using it?
Technically, they might not. You could do it and it would never be any harm to you. The only really issue is ethics. So you're using someone's art without their permission.
Liability to Stanford.
Liability to Stanford. Credibility to you. So like if you don't want a reputation for using things without permission.
And there are an increasing number of bots that are out there surfing the internet, scrubbing the internet, looking for copyright violations so that they can come after you.
But you also don't want it to be something where your overarching organization, the conference you're presenting at, now says, oh, you use this, I can't share your materials now, and now you've given this presentation and it can't be reused. So you also just want to make sure you're maximizing audience potential. The more you build out with attention to copyright, the more universal your content will be.
And if you cite where it came from, does that
get around copyright, or you're not even allowed to?
You should always cite, it depends on the license. There are some things that are fair use, no matter how you do it. And there are some things that require, and it'll tell you, with credits. If you are not protected just by getting credit though. So, I mean, that's kind of the common misconceptions that, oh, I'm education, and I told you where I got it from. But if I go throw Moana up there without Disney's permission and then throw it on an LMS, even though it's only my kids that are accessing it, technically it's publicly accessible, technically a broken copyright law.
Just FYI, there's actually an image search in Blue Lane's catalog.
I was gonna mention.
And then we go, yes.
Because it takes out some of the guesswork of trying to figure out like who owns the image and how you need to cite it. So if it only does like, biomedical images though, because we go through some different repositories of biomedical images. So like for lungs, you can find one there that, and it'll tell you approximately how to cite it and everything. You'll still have to go to the website usually to look at the source directly. But it does help take some of the guesswork out for looking for those biomedical images.
Just to go to the image, you can't
Thank you. There we go. And these are the hardest images to find. So even in here, if you get super specific, coming up with medical images is very, very tricky.
Can we
But
show
this is a great
how to
resource.
get to the PowerPoint template?
Yes.
So if you go to PowerPoint and you say open from template, and you press new from template.
Don't you still have to have it downloaded first?
Oh, you know what? It's through Google Slides. It's in Google Slides.
Yeah, there it's populated.
And then you can download it from Google Slides.
Oh, okay.
Sorry about that.
Because I downloaded it first.
Slide stuff google.com.
You have to be logged in with your Stanford.
You have to be logged in with your Stanford ID. So under template gallery, hit the ...
Sorry, this little bar, you can't see it on my way.
No, that's not it.
All right.
Okay, and now scroll down. And where there's that little down arrow to the left of your mouse, hit the down arrow. And there it is, Stanford Medicine Light. That's the one.
All right. And then you can, if you're not using Google Slides, you could go File, Download as Microsoft PowerPoint. We will potentially be doing another session specifically on Google Slides. It'll be more of like a do it together kind of a thing. I don't know when we're going to do that one, but we've talked about doing one, and then one for, is anyone here ever using Keynote? Is that even still a thing?
I'm curious about it, but I don't use it.
I loved it, but I don't use it anymore either. Well, thank you for coming. We got 1 minute left. We'll send out a follow-up email.
Awesome.
Let me know if you got what you wanted.
Yeah.